The Surgeon General recently published a study that said one of the greatest health threats in our country is the epidemic of loneliness. So we know that generally people are feeling isolated and disconnected. This no doubt has some connection to the pandemic, but is a broader issue with an increasingly technological society and just part of our individualistic Western cultural heritage. So we have the general issue of isolation, and we know that people seek community in part to combat that. But as many of us know who have lived in community, community doesn't solve all these problems. And even if I may feel more personally fulfilled within a community itself can be isolated. And it can seem like we're the only ones doing the things that we're doing. We're the only ones trying to live out the gospel call in this particular way. Essentially, we feel like Elijah in the wilderness, not aware of the thousands who also haven't bowed the knee. So what Evan and I want to lead this conversation in is how do we keep in mind the thousands as a way to be encouraged and supported so that we can continue to be faithful in our callings. Evan, I think one thing that you mentioned, and maybe you want to expand on this, is besides this general malaise of loneliness and isolation that can even creep into our communities, that a lot of us have experienced some negative experiences within churches or within other kinds of religious environments.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm noticing, and others as well, there's kind of a dual call going on at the same time, or a dual cry that I see globally even. And one is the cry for community. We are all looking to find good ways of connecting with each other. And at the same time, there is a cry of how does this work, or broken communities. We tried this and it didn't work, or we saw that and it didn't work. And there's hurts, there's pains, and we want to take another step. And so how do we connect with others and learn from others to do a better job this time around?
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a hunger, a longing for growth among us, which can only come as we continue to reach out to others within our community and then outside of our communities. And then also just the need for healing, the ongoing need for healing and repair, which also will only come through others within the community, but also without the community. So I think we're going to start with a breakout session. Evan, is that right? Can you set that up for us?
Yeah, why don't you introduce the breakout and I will see how to do that. Thank you. We had a couple questions.
Yeah, and I realize I don't have the questions right in front of me.
Okay, I'll do the questions.
Okay, sorry.
Let's see. One moment. I think what we were going to try and talk about is why do you want to be connected? There's kind of just some things here we all gathered. Why is it you want to be connected? I mean, even joining this Zoom meeting. And then along with that is just a summary of what is the value of connection for individuals, and communities, and then people inquiring about about community life. What is it that connection does for an individual, for a community, and for people inquiring? So those are the two questions. We'll have about 5 minutes. Yeah. And then we'll return back. Thank you to Alden for creating those.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you, Evan, for reminding me. So you'll get us put into those groups.
Evan, do you want me to do the groups? How many groups do you think?
Oh, I thought Alden was doing it. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Let's see. We've got about 12 people, 13 people here. So what about 4 groups? I think I can do it.
I've posted the questions in the chat.
Okay. Can you see them? All right. Everyone, looks like everyone's joining the room. Joe, do we have to join one manually? I don't even see my name in the list.
I don't know. I think it involved how you did it, Alden.
Oh, well, I should let you do
So
it. Sorry.
I'm not real experienced at it either, but let me see if we can unassigned Alden, and that's probably me.
Well,
I could assign you to a room, it looks like.
yeah, or I can just join one of them. I have that option on mine.
Okay. I don't know that I'm seeing how to join, how myself I can join, but why don't you go ahead and join one, and I'll just hang out here and be here in case somebody else joins the call. How's that?
Okay. Okay,
Okay,
that'll work.
good.
Hey, Toby. We were having some troubles with to hear to hear Toby. I don't know if it's something related to the connection.
Okay. Just to let you know, Joe, that Mike Kelly is still trying.
Yeah, I saw that he disappeared there again. So
All right, we're all back. We lost Mike. Well, I hope you all had some good conversations. They're never long enough, but hopefully get a sense of what people are already up to and just hearing from each other, that desire for connection across the network of communities. What we wanted to do now, since we have a scholar among us, Evan, is hear a little bit of how communities in the past have done this. And Evan's done a lot of work in the history of communities, not just new monastic, but old monastic. So he's going to tell us a little bit about some ways communities have stayed connected in the past. And then we'll share a couple of stories, I think Joe and myself, and then maybe we'll just hear from some others, some ways that we have stayed in touch across distances. So Evan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Alden. I am going to go ahead and read what I have to say, simply because if I talked from the cuff, I would probably talk for an hour. So the trick is that when I started researching this, I found an entire library of material on the subject. It was just overwhelming, really exciting. Even if I read the titles of the material that I either downloaded or got from interlibrary loan or things that would take 10 minutes. So we won't do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you 4 examples. Number 1, the Apostle Paul and the practice of visitation. Sometimes when people ask me about church, and just to be obnoxious, I ask them, what church did the Apostle Paul attend? It's not really a fair question because, of course, other apostles settled down in a single spot for the rest of their lives. But the point is this, Paul traveled. It was his way of life. And his travels were not only about planting communities, but also visiting them and networking them. In Acts 15:36, we hear Paul suggesting to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they were doing." Sometimes Paul had traveling companions. Other times he sent his companions to do the visiting themselves. And of course, we know that Paul followed up his visits with letters. He was good at networking. He visited churches he founded, like the one at Corinth, writing them that, "I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend time with you." He informs the church at Rome, a church he did not plant, of his desire to visit them. "I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith." Paul was not alone in the ministry of visitation, for we read in the 2nd epistle of John how the author has, quote, "much to write you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete." By the 4th century Council of Chalcedon, visitation became a standard and official practice among communities of faith. I have in my library a guide for visitations of Benedictine monasteries, published in 1994. The fact is, the practice of folks from one community or itinerant ministers visiting other communities for mutual encouragement is as old as the Christian church itself. Number 2, Basil the Great and gatherings. Basil, also known as the Great, following the lead of his elder sister Macrina, founded a monastic community in present-day Turkey in 356. He had visited a variety of monastic expressions and decided to pioneer an expression tailored for his own environment and culture. Over the years, people asked about community life, and Basil took notes on his responses. The collections of questions with his answers were ultimately published as the Rule or Responses of Basil. In the longer collection of responses, Basil speaks about gathering folks from different communities together. He urges, and I quote, "It is a good plan that the heads of the community should meet together occasionally at certain appointed times and places. At these assemblies, they should lay before one another for consideration irregular situations, characters which are exceptionally difficult to deal with, and details of their administration, so that, if any of the leaders be delinquent in any respect, fellow superiors will point it out, and what has rightly been done may be confirmed by their collective testimony." End quote. So you see, as with visitation, the practice of periodic gatherings for encouragement, mutual correction, and even decision-making ultimately became a common practice among Christian communities. Indeed, after the foundation of the Cistercians in the 11th century, Regular gatherings of members and or leaders, or what's called a general chapter, was declared normative, influencing, by the way, even the development of democracy in the centuries to follow. Number 3, the early Jesuits and letter writing. I've already mentioned letter writing in my comments on Paul. Indeed, the practice of writing letters between circles of friends and connections was important throughout the history of communities of Christ. Here, I simply want to tell you about one classic example from the 16th century, the Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus. Ignatius of Loyola had a radical conversion and gathered a group of followers. Immediately upon official approval, they took off in all directions, scattering to serve Christ and the church throughout the globe. Exciting, yes, but also a problem. John O'Malley writes in his account of the first Jesuits, if recruits were to be gained and members retained, they had to be instructed in what the society was about. Ignatius and his closest associates were keenly aware that the communication of the ideals, goals, and style of the society did not occur automatically, and it has to be sustained on a consistent and ongoing basis. So O'Malley continues, this situation accounts for the extraordinary emphasis the Jesuit constitutions, or their formal documents, placed on correspondence as a means of achieving union of hearts. Correspondence, letter writing. The constitutions themselves declare that, and I quote, another very special help toward unity will be communication by letter between subjects and superiors, and their learning frequently about one another and hearing the news and reports which come from various regions. Now, that was paragraph 673. Paragraphs 674 through 676 specify precisely how this is going to be accomplished and who is responsible to see that it gets done. They were in order, and the Jesuits practiced what they preach. Again, O'Malley writes, by 1565, the society numbered about 3,500 members who were exhorted or obliged to maintain regular correspondence with each other, and especially with the Jesuit leadership in Rome. The letters of Ignatius of Loyola alone fill 12 volumes, which includes 7,000 letters, constituting the largest correspondence extant of any 16th century figure, none accepted. Some of these letters were copied and sent to the entire membership, probably making them some of the first ministry newsletters in history. Number 4, the Sisters of Loretto and common tasks. 70 years ago, sisters, Catholic women vowed to consecrated life and serving usually in schools, hospitals, Catholic charities, and such, constituted more than 80% of all monks, nuns, friars, and so on in the United States. For reasons much too complicated to explore here, that situation has changed. The number of sisters decreased dramatically. Many had to sell their schools and the convents or homes attached to them, and moved to dispersed housing more conducive to their new ministries. How could they support one another in the midst of this crisis? One method was to connect around common tasks, to network through ministry. The Sisters of Loretto are specialists in this kind of networking. A 2002 article in the National Catholic Reporter declares, if Loretto sisters had a middle initial in common, it wouldn't be M for Mary, it would be N for network. Just a couple of examples. In the late 1970s, Sister Virginia Williams founded the Loretto Women's Network, a collection of sisters and friends committed to act for the empowerment of women. They have served as advocates regarding psychological abuse, human trafficking, and other issues for many years. Similarly, in the early 1990s, Sisters Marianne Coyle and Nancy Whitwer founded the Loretto Earth Network, dedicated to reestablishing right relationships between the human community and the Earth community. They've developed an extensive collection of Earth education resources and are involved in a number of environmental causes. The practice of intercommunity cooperative networking for a common cause is a standard practice among sisters today. Jung-Un Sophia Park writes in a 2019 discussion of the life of Catholic sisters, today, many communities are involved in cooperative ministries. For example, the Social Justice and Peace Network is composed of 12 congregations or 12 different religious orders and works for social justice and peace on a global scale. Celtic monastic settlements communicated and cooperated in the development of educational systems in the Middle Ages. Dominicans and Franciscans collaborated in evangelistic ministries. The modern Protestant mission movement provides ample testimony to the practice of communities working together for a common cause. Once again, we see throughout Christian history that people have joined together in creative ways for the sake of the gospel. Conclusion. I wish I could tell you about targeted introductions, gift giving, sharing members or even leaders, and other common practices that contributed to the networking of Christian communities throughout history. All we've covered here is 4 of them. But suffice it to say that intercommunity networking is an old and central practice of the Christian faith. Indeed, one might go so far as to say that the Christian church is better understood not as a collection of buildings or institution, but as a network of communities connecting with each other in various forms to follow Christ. So, Alden, back to you.
Thanks, Evan. It's always helpful to see how Christians throughout history have done things. Sometimes there's inspiration there for new ways for us. Sometimes just confirmation that we're on the right track. We're not all that different from our brothers and sisters 1,500 years ago. We did want to talk, just give a couple of testimonies of what this looks like in our own communities. And Joe, I'll invite you to share a little bit, especially from the early days of Hope Network, but then also how Hope Fellowship, and then how you've continued since then.
Sure. Yeah, so Nancy and I have been married. We'll come up on our 50th anniversary this next year. For the first 12 years, we were involved in Christian community in Chicago, and then God led us to Waco in 1986. And we joined in with a brand spanking new group called, ironically, this is one of the great ironies, one of the great disasters of naming a Christian community ever, called Reconcilers Fellowship, which we were a very unreconciled group. And after 7 years, we just flew apart. A couple of things that, sort of felt very much during the trauma of falling apart. One was we didn't have any real outside relationships. We had refused, the group had refused to join a denomination or join in with other groups. And it was sort of, denominations are impure, so we were not going to go that route. And then the other part of that was when we were struggling, we could not come up with an agreement to turn to anybody on the outside of the community to help us when our crisis and our leadership struggles got so serious. It was just very frustrating. I think I put forward 7 different proposals for going to the outside, and every single one of them was rejected. So that community fell apart. Nancy and I were sort of left, what are we doing here? And really felt God leading us to try again, which may have seemed strange. Waco's a highly churched town, and why start something else? But it was really not about attending church. It was about living it daily with other Christians. And we just felt this is what God wants us to do. And another couple joined in with us that had been involved in the previous effort. And it just became abundantly clear, was abundantly clear to us immediately that we needed to affiliate ourselves with others. one reason was we knew if we got to a crisis again, we would need to turn to the outside for help, and we shouldn't wait until that point to be forming those relationships. Another was that, Waco, especially during those years, I think everybody in Waco thought they really knew what church was all about. And we felt, well, we really need to connect with some others that would, because this is about living daily life, who can help us understand better what the Christian walk is really about. So we made the 1,000-mile journey up to the Chicago area, and Reba Place and Plow Creek had formed sort of a little association of just their two communities, calling themselves Shalom Mission Communities. We showed up, just the two couples of us, and said, and we had some relationships there, so they weren't totally surprised, but said, we want to join you. And they were a little shocked to have a community from 1,000 miles away. But we joined. We also decided to go ahead and join the Mennonites. They were the one denomination that would have us, I think, at that point. Plus, it also meant in Waco we could define what Mennonites looked like, because we were the only Mennonite group in town. But we really put our energy into Shalom Missions. And for the last 30 years, that's where a tremendous amount of effort has gone for us in maintaining relationships with Reba. Plow Creek has gone away now. It dissolved several years ago. We've had other communities. Alden's community in St. Louis was part of that. Church of the Sojourners in San Francisco, now Jubilee Partners in Georgia. You look at it, it is a tremendous investment on our part to carry on those relationships across the country. And we regularly have to ask, why do we do this? But we've recognized it's just in terms of mutual aid, the relationships that have been built, the marriages that have happened, and now being sustained really for 30 years as a community, which makes us relatively ancient as a Christian community in some ways, that those relationships have just been very important for us. We don't invest money in building or staff, but we invest money and energy in those relationships. So it's influenced who we are, helps us understand why we exist and what it means to carry on this way of life. So that'd be sort of my story in that, Alden.
Thanks, Joe. I'll just throw in a few things from my experience, and it actually parallels a lot of the things that Joe shared. So when we started our community in St. Louis in the early 2000s, we were all fairly young. All of us were coming at this with no prior experience. So we also needed some guidance. We needed some mentorship. We couldn't have articulated that at the time. It actually was a brewing crisis that caused me to reach out to David Jansen, who had just published his handbook. And so that was the one person whose name that I knew that I could reach out to. And he was very gracious, and I was sort of shocked that he called me back. And anyway, helped us through that particular crisis, which all worked out really well. But then he also, over the course of those conversations, invited us to come up to Plow Creek or a Shalom Missions camp out. And it wasn't just a couple of us. It was actually our whole little community that went up, and it wasn't very far from St. Louis. And that was definitely a turning point for us, just to see all these other people who were doing the things that we were trying to do, but were more advanced on this road, to get more support, to get more ideas of things that we could be doing. So that moment was big. And eventually, after we were together for about 5 years, we did officially join Shalom Missions for the rest of our time together as a community. We also, as opportunity allowed, traveled to Reba Place, traveled to Bruderhof communities, visited where we could to see what other people were up to. We also hosted several Bruderhof couples. People like Chico and Tatiana would be driving through, and we would host them. Kent Smith and his group from Abilene traveled through at one point, and so we had the opportunity, partially because we were in a central location, to also become the host. And same sort of thing, of course, sharing and growing through those. And I think the only thing that I'll add beyond what Joe said is I've been out of community now for about 6 years. Our family has been. And so maintaining connection to communities like Hope, like Reba, like the Bruderhof, where we had dear friends and close relations, connecting through these Zoom calls and through the Nurturing Communities Network has been really life-giving to us in a really different kind of environment than we had been in. And I don't know how many people there are out there like that who have tasted community, but for various reasons are not a member of a community at the time. I think these networks are also especially important. Well, that's a little bit of my story. I think, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we want to open things up and either hear from people who maybe have some other stories to contribute, but specifically, I think we'd like to think about what comes out of these connections. So what are the, what do they actually look like? Some other things that you guys have experienced, and then what's the content of connection? Is that right, Evan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, means, fruit, experience.
Can I have the NCN regional gatherings been folks' primary ways of connecting with communities, like these kind of larger gatherings, or has it been more like on the visitation model?
Joe, do you want to speak to that?
David, could you just state that once more? I'm sorry, somebody was out my front window trying to get my attention. So
Yeah, I'm just wondering maybe what's been, and maybe they're just both really important, but is it these kind of, there's the regional gatherings that happen through Nurturing Communities. Have those been really key places of reconnecting, or has it been more one-off visitations that have served to,
Well, I
create
there's a history here and a development of things. I think a lot of you know that David Jansen really is the one who got this started and did it for a number of years, 9, 10 years. A lot of David's work really was in mentoring and the relationships. Although during that time, there were a number of large gatherings too, where the network began to form between different communities. When David stepped back, we decided to emphasize the network more. So a lot of what we've been doing, of course, the pandemic affected things where all of us did less traveling, and we did a lot of these Zoom meetings for a few years. Turns out there really is a lot of just sort of networking that goes on. I think there are one-on-one relationships, but they're not centralized. I think the regional meetings have typically been fairly small. One just happened in the Northeast that Toby could tell us about, where we had a pretty good crowd there. Of course, there's a higher concentration of communities there. Mary Lou and Rusty were just part of a regional gathering out in the Portland area where 3 communities and I think probably 8, 9, 10 people showed up for that one. Then, last year, most of us on this call, I think, were part of that. We had the huge gathering in Kentucky. For us, what seemed huge, about 200 plus folks that gathered for that. And that was wonderful. So, I think we look for it however it can happen. I don't know if anybody else wants to pitch in on that. Toby, you've been so engaged in all this. Do you want to share anything on that?
Yes. How's the audio? It was having trouble before. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Great to be together with us all again. It's always a joy. I just pasted into the chat something that Christiana Peterson said both in the room at the final session of our conference in Kentucky last October 2022, and also wrote in her blog, which is listed on the website. But she said, I realized that one of the reasons I was still clinging to my faith was because of my experience in Intentional Christian Community. They were members of Plow Creek Fellowship until it disbanded in 2017. And now they live in Ohio as a family, not in community. She said, for all of its flaws and conflicts, Christian Community offered me a different vision, a vision of a different way. It had showed me that another way was possible, a way of following Jesus, apart from authoritarian structures and power-hungry charismatic leaders and the capitalistic American dream, a way that cared for the needs of others. You can read the rest of it. I had been given that vision for 8 years, and frankly, it has ruined me for the normal American dream. And I was very thrilled and encouraged to hear Christiana say that and write that in her blog, which kind of encapsulated, I thought, the reason why we do this, to give each other hope and courage and faith that we're not alone. I came across a quote from our good friend Ross Martini-Eiler in Bloomington Christian Radical Community yesterday, where he said much the same, that we reach out and connect because it's so easy to feel alone. And as Christians pursuing the way of community, we are never alone. We're part of a network. We're part of something bigger. Yeah, our regional gathering here 2 weeks ago, come over for 24 hours. It was full of
we are losing him again.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Toby, you're cutting in and out now, I think.
Yeah, we're not able to hear you either, Toby.
Well, maybe he'll be able to come back on and we can hear the rest of what he has to say. All right. In the meantime, I think we want to have one more 5-minute breakout, and then we'll get back together for a closing prayer and closing thoughts. Does that sound good to you, Evan?
Yeah, or we could leave it open. What do you think's best?
Well, that's true. It's not a very big group, so I think the thing that. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Well, I had a question. Lida may have just no. Lida's still here with us. I think Lida's from Japusa, and Japusa I see as an example of a community that has a very active relationship with a denomination and active relationship with other communities. And I don't know if you had any comment on that, Lida, how the two connections work for you all, and is that really effective to have both of those?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's been interesting because there's connections in a number of different ways. First of all, with our denomination, we are affiliated with a group called the Evangelical Covenant Church and have been members of the Evangelical Covenant Church since 1989. We've been involved with the, well, way back, probably in the 70s, there used to be more Christian communities in Chicago, and the leaders of those communities used to meet together in person monthly. There was the Reba Place, there was us, there was a place out in the western suburbs called Daystar, there was a group called the Austin Community, there was and several other smaller things, and actually you know, some of them no longer exist. And I think during the early years, it really kind of helped with checks and balances, you know, at least for us to know that we weren't alone. I think as time went on, as we grew bigger, as our mission grew, and that you know, and as some of these communities kind of faded or changed direction in which they were involved, you know, again, you know, I've never really been in real leadership in our community. I've just been a longtime member. But, you know, I think that the Nurturing Communities Network has been very, very valuable to us as a community. I know that we've had different times people from the Bruderhof come and stay with us. And I remember one time we were, some of our folks were at some sort of youth convention, and one of the gals got injured, and actually the Bruderhof came and picked her up and visited her in the hospital. And it was, you know, really, really a sweet and precious time. And so I know that there's been that. I remember way long ago, actually in Waco, Texas, there's a history of a community that Keith Green started, and it was called the Last Days Ministries. And actually Keith Green had come to Chicago and saw what Jesus People was doing, and he says, okay, well, you got a community, I'm going to do a community. And so he was actually in California at the time, and gathered a bunch of people, and then eventually they moved to Waco after his death, and that they merged with YWAM. But in those early days, sometimes he had folks that didn't quite fit into their community, and he would send them to us. Actually, we had people, right now we currently have a person who was with Reba Place, who now lives with us. We have a young, well, he's not that young anymore, but a guy who was actually raised at Plow Creek. And he's been a longtime member of Jesus People. So, you know, sometimes you have kind of cross-pollination. I think that's very valuable. I think with knowing different communities, and Christian communities in particular, you get to get different perspectives on how things operate, and maybe some real valuable lessons that if maybe there's something not quite going right in your place, maybe some other perspective that someone else is doing and has worked for them may work out, maybe not always, and maybe it's not the right fit, because, you know, obviously each one of our communities has their own footprint and has their own unique things that make them who they are. You know, some are income sharing, some are, you know, some are not. You know, some are more like a co-housing setup. There's others that, you know, are more like a development corporation, and part of it, that's the beauty of it, because there's somewhere for just about anyone who is seeking Christian community. So that's all I have to say on that matter.
Well, we want to kind of conclude with some practical ways that we can stay connected. And so I think we can just open it up. Several things have emerged from our conversation, such as our Zoom calls or the regional gatherings. But we want to open it up for people to reflect briefly on ways that their communities can either reach out and make connections or sustain connections that they already have.
I have a quick question for people involved with a denomination. Our group decided early on not to affiliate with any, historical denomination because of, whatever, all the reasons. But I just wonder how practically is that helpful or not, or any just quick comment on that?
I'll say for Hope Fellowship, we put a lot, as I said, we put a lot of energy into Shalom missions and into nurturing communities. We put much less energy into the Mennonite denomination that we're part of. We do contribute to it financially. We love the resources and literature that they produce. And I think we value the identity that they help provide us. It really does seem to be the most comfortable fit. So it keeps us from just, I think, just sort of, it's one thing that keeps us from just sort of heading off in our own direction. And it's sort of a humbling thing for us to say, yeah, denominations aren't perfect. They have a sordid history, but so do we. So we're not perfect, and we've got our own history. So let's recognize it's good to be part of the larger historic Christian family. Somehow identify ourselves, even though we'll really still want to call ourselves an ecumenical group at the same time. And fortunately, Mennonites had no problems with any of that. We even said we're not going to go through the normal credentialing that you require of member churches. It's just not who we are. Our memberships and our leadership is all homegrown, and it will change from time to time, but they've accepted that. So they were very willing to let us sort of be the square peg in the round hole on that.
Mary Lou, I think one of the things I've seen in exploring this whole thing historically is that formal associations can become a wonderful embrace and support and that sort of thing. That embrace can also become a straitjacket. And so there's, how do you navigate that, when and where? The acceptance of the Franciscans, Francis's wildness was a marvelous thing. It gave it some order. It also transformed Francis's view into something that was a little bit different than what Francis originally had wanted. So how do you navigate that?
I can speak a little bit with our affiliation with the Covenant. Again, when we became affiliated with the Covenant in the mid 1980s, again, we were just a bunch of Jesus freaks in their probably early 30s. And we were looking for something beyond ourselves that could really, help to ground us, maybe theologically, with some history. I think there was a couple of other groups that we had actually approached, and they were like, okay, well, you can be part of our place, but, hey, all the guys have to cut their hair, and all the, you can't listen to rock music and, Christian rock music or anything like that. And the Covenant seemed to embrace us. And of all the churches that are affiliated with them, we are the first and still the only communal congregation in their midst. And, and they have supported us, in many, many ways through the years, helped us through some very difficult times. And all I can say, it's been, and on the other hand, we've been able to show them and maybe some of their member churches, that there's other ways of doing ministry.
Thank you.
I have a comment I'd like to make before we break into smaller groups, and that is, well, I went to SMC in Waco and was greatly inspired. We met there with all the Waco people, and there were some Chicago people and some Plow Creek people, I think maybe even at the time. Inspiring to me, but I had a hard time inspiring everybody when I came back. I went to Kentucky last year, greatly inspiring to me. Hard time passing that on to everybody here. But when we did a visitation, and Joe and Tim Otto and Kendra from 3 different churches came to us, I think the potential for inspiring our group was much higher. You know, they did the role of analyst and recommendations to us. Probably we didn't do enough of, hey, how do you folks do this and how do you do that? And, you know, more mixing of an exposure for our group. But anyway, the visitation was 10 times better for our group than having sent someone to a national gathering.
You know, one of the early, well, it wasn't early, maybe about 7, 8 years into our existence and relationship with Shalom Missions, there was a meeting at Plow Creek, and we took a caravan of 4 cars and drove through the night with about, I don't know, there were at least 20 to 25 of us. You know, it was a wild trip it was before cell phones, trying to stay together. We got lost in the cornfield of Illinois trying to find Plow Creek. But it was such a great experience, you know, and I look back, we were a younger group, so it's probably a little easier to say to, you know, sort of a wild hair of a thing. Let's go do this, you know, let's have a road trip together for a long weekend. But and a lot of children were on that trip, but it was so, I think what you're saying, Rusty, was so good to, you know, you can't just do it with 1 or 2 people. You got to somehow find that way of getting a number of people involved before it starts to make sense. But I think for now with Hope Fellowship, I mean, communities are a long ways away, but every once in a while, probably I guess we do it about every 4 or 5 years, Hope Fellowship will host the large reunion. And, you know, people really step up to that. Some folks that have not been involved in the relationship, they are willing to open their homes and host people for the weekend. And we just had an SMC meeting in Waco a few weeks ago, and it was, again, a great event with not that many people with SMC came this time, but there were, I think, 30, 35 people from out of town that came. So the way to do it.
Well, we've come to the end of our hour. Traditionally, we hang around for a while, about 30 more minutes after the official time ends, just to chat and continue the conversation or bring up new topics if that's what we need to do. But we do want to go ahead and sort of close out our time if anyone needs to go. Roberto, would you mind kind of closing us in prayer? And then again, if you want to stick around, then we'll be here to continue to chat.
Sure. Thank you. English is my second language, so I actually only pray in Spanish. I hope that is good with everybody. Thank you. Let's pray. Señor, gracias Dios por el día que nos has dado, esta mañana hermosa que nos has concedido y por la oportunidad de estar juntos, Señor, porque tú nos unes a través de tu amor, porque tú, Señor, eres quien nos conecta. Tú, Señor, eres la fuente de nuestra unión, nuestra conexión y el amor que tenemos, Señor, como hermanos. Te pedimos, Señor, que tú traigas fruto a estas conversaciones y que nos permita, Señor, abrir cada vez más nuestro corazón a esa unidad que tú deseas, Padre, en tu cuerpo. Te damos gracias en nombre de Cristo Jesús. Amén.
Thank you so much.
Roberto, ¿dónde vives?
Saltillo is very close to Laredo, Texas, like 3 hours to Laredo, like 4 hours to Eagle Pass, Texas. Yeah. I was thinking about the question regarding the connection with the denomination, and here in Saltillo, one of the things that we having, I think we are the other way around. We having part of the church since always, and the connection that we have with the Christian intentional communities is been more recent. But one of the things that we really value is how we can interact with the other local expressions of churches here in Saltillo. So there are about 10 to 15 from the Churches of Christ, Christian churches here in the city, and we are all different. We have a lot of differences between each other, but one of the good things that we found in this relationship is that it gives us the opportunity to deal with those relationships, even as different as we are, and that is it. There's a lot of value on that also, having those people around you, and having those connections have been very helpful for us as a group also.
Simone, are you on our call?
I am. I'm an hour late.
That's okay. We're still here.
Great.
We've been
Hi,
talking.
everyone.
We've been talking about the way that our communities can stay connected with each other, and what are the blessings and benefits of that, and just thinking practically about what that looks like for us.
One of the things that I've noticed recently is how the combination of periodic gatherings and then informal sharing of members really facilitates this kind of thing. I just returned, went in August to Switzerland, to the new monastic roundtable there. And it was a gathering of about 20 communities plus. And there was just a lot of general information shared, resources, ideas. This is a fairly new group, and so they're just getting to know each other. But a lot of hope got shared in the middle of that. And it grew just because, hey, this person knows this person and involved in the community, and hey, why don't you come to the gathering? And then afterwards, there was people that then traveled over to visit another community or things like that, and then would stay for a while. I hope, I was actually thinking about it because Elizabeth posted this morning, there's another person, Elizabeth Terman, I forget how to pronounce the last name. Anyway, but anyway, she is now in Spain with the Shamanuf group. And I really look forward to hearing from her and from Tim Otto and his travels and what we learned from those kind of network community tours.
We had this on our list, but I don't think anyone's brought it up. And that's the role of something as simple as newsletters or emails, email newsletter, physical newsletter. SMC still sends out a paper newsletter. I know Chico and Tatiana have a famously beautiful newsletter that comes out, I guess, when the spirit moves Chico to finish it. I think for a lot of us, these are really important, if for nothing else, just again, a sign of hope, seeing that the Spirit's moving elsewhere. And of course, it's nice to get news about people, but that's another way that we haven't talked about, that we can kind of stay connected.
And let's not underestimate the power of social media. I don't know how many communities have social media accounts, but that's also another way, not only to broadcast news about your community, but also information about your community to people who may very well be interested in it.
We've got one of our teenagers in Hope Fellowship, who's going to be turning 18, has decided to register as a conscientious objector because of his faith in Jesus. And I just heard that he's written an article for the Shalom Connections. A couple of people really encouraged him to go ahead and do it that way. I've never seen Jonas write anything before, but we're going to see an article from him. And I just, all of us instantly recognized how meaningful that is for him, making this step to sort of declare himself, not just within Hope Fellowship, but with, some other folks from other communities too. And just, again, appreciative of the network that we have. Once we see it, maybe we'll try to see if he's be willing for us to put it on the blog for nurturing communities. So we'll see if that'll work.
I'm wondering if some of those of you who have been in community for less time, or who are newer to community, what you've experienced or what you'd like to see in order to stay connected, what would be helpful?
I think that for myself, I just need to write letters to people, and I just don't do it. Like, I've sent out letters right after the NCN national conference or international conference last year to people that I wanted to connect with and like be friends with. And I did receive, just correspondence back, but I am not good at staying connected myself. And so just like reaching out to people, getting back in touch with people it's just a priority it's a priority that I would like to work on. Even though like I do want to be connected with folks and with their communities and to engage. So yeah, it seems like a personal goal to achieve.
Yeah, in my research, I discovered there are books, professional books on networking. And some of them are business books, and you think, oh, CEO books on networking, do I really want to take a look? But actually, there's some wisdom in learning how to stay connected well. And so I ordered one of those books just to give myself some lessons and just those same kind of things, Simon. I think I can meet well, but following up with those meetings is another story.
What social media attempts, I think, was that like you, Leda, who mentioned that? I'm wondering on the like nurturing communities levels, I'm sure different communities have maybe tried, I don't know, podcasts or Instagrams. One of my housemates, who's you know, a little more in tune with social media stuff, just started an Instagram for Seed House here in Minneapolis. And so he's adding fun little stories on there. And yeah, I'm just curious if there's been what have been fruitful attempts at that, or fruitful like ways to just keep sharing stories more holistically as a Nurturing Communities network.
I know that we have both Facebook and Instagram accounts that really are administrated by folks that's one of their jobs as such. In addition to that, there are also individuals within our own community that have their own personal accounts that tell stories of community life or their own musings and that. I think it could take many forms. There's it's there's some that are involved more in the arts, maybe some more theologically inclined, maybe some more that are strictly daily life in community. Some are more mission or social justice oriented. So there's just a lot of ways that could take. So it just depends. You got to start somewhere. It's nothing's perfect, and sometimes you have individuals that might have their own page, and what they say is their opinion and not necessarily the voice of the community as a whole. And you have to have that in mind. If it's an official page from our community, then pretty much it is speaking for the community. But yeah, and our community is fairly diverse, even theologically or whatever, though there are some core elements that we do hold. But I don't know if we'll find two people that absolutely believe the same way, right down the line, and people who focus more on different things. So yeah, so it's just just interesting.
One of the things I noticed, I not only went to Switzerland, I also visited England while I was there recently. The England folks, I hosted a gathering of people who are interested in these topics. And the younger ones immediately created a WhatsApp group among themselves. And they were located all over the UK. But now they are in touch through texting back and forth through this WhatsApp group, and they'd never known each other beforehand, and now it's a regular kind of thing. So interesting to see how these things develop when we're familiar with the medium.
I just wanted to say here before we go that I'm really thankful for all the work that you are doing to make this happen. I know it's not a small task to do. The regional gathering in Pennsylvania just last week, was huge, and I really think that it's important to have these, and all of the things that you're doing is really part of bringing it together. The Zoom meetings that we have now, the regionals and the national, those things really work together to get us connected. And it works because I see people, I meet people and they know me, they know who I am when I step in the door. It's really, it means a lot to me when that happens, like it did today.
Thanks, Finn. I want to say your commitment and engagement has helped make it work too. So thank you.
It, yeah, I'm being 4 years in a little bit more officially, and still getting to know various folks in Nurturing Communities Network. It's just really encouraging to, see the shoulders I stand up on. I tried to do as much research and connecting before helping start a community house. And it just continues to be a wealth of consideration to see all the different ways that folks have tried stuff out, and to remember that failure and healing are a part of the stories. And so it just keeps me humble and encouraged. And yeah, I'm just interested in this continuing to be a good tradition here in North America and abroad.
Thanks, David. Well, I think it's time to wrap up for this morning, and I want to give a special thanks to Evan for sharing his expertise and research. It's just always a blessing to hear from what he has to say. Thanks to Joe and his leadership of the Nurturing Communities Network, and for sharing some of the story of Hope Fellowship. And thanks to all of you for taking some time to connect. This is so valuable. Please keep your ears open for opportunities to connect locally, regionally, but also keep in mind the big Nurturing Communities Network gathering, which will be almost exactly a year from now. And we are already thick into planning that gathering. And if you were there last time, you know that it was life-giving and encouraging. But we have to keep connecting and keep it up. Any final words? Okay. Blessings to the rest of your day, and I hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Also, Alden, thank you so much for playing MC. I never could have done it. You did fabulous.
Thanks, Evan. Bye-bye.
Okay.